Dr. Julia Patterson, a seasoned cardiac surgeon, believed she understood the human heart in every conceivable way, its intricate mechanics, its fragile resilience, its relentless rhythm. But that certainty began to falter the day a new chief of staff arrived, shaking the very foundations of her professional philosophy. The true jolt, however, awaited her in the hushed sanctity of the operating room, when the chief himself lay vulnerable beneath her skilled hands. Julia was meticulously closing the final suture, her brow furrowed in concentration, when the double doors of the operating suite swung open with such unexpected force that her scrub nurse Laura visibly flinched. Framed in the doorway stood a man in his late 40s, dressed in crisp surgical scrubs, his hair neatly tucked under a cap. His expression was a stark, unyielding mask that promised anything but ease. "Excuse me, but the procedure isn't complete," Julia stated, her voice calm despite the intrusion, her gaze unwavering from the delicate tissue she was mending. "And unauthorized personnel are not permitted."
"Victor Harding, your new chief of staff," the man announced, his voice smooth yet laced with an undeniable authority that filled the sterile air. "And I assure you, I'm hardly unauthorized."
Julia finally lifted, her eyes meeting his. 2 decades spent navigating the high-stakes world of surgery had honed her ability to read people in an instant. This man, Victor, was clearly one of a particular breed, accustomed to command, impatient with dissent, utterly convinced of his own indispensable vision. He exuded the polished arrogance of someone sent from a sprawling urban medical centre to streamline operations in a smaller community hospital like theirs, nestled just outside the quiet charm of Maplewood. "The operating room is a sacred space," she replied, her tone cool, a subtle challenge in her steady gaze. "Even for chiefs of staff." A faint, almost imperceptible smirk touched Harding's lips. "We shall see," he murmured before turning and exiting the room as abruptly as he had entered. Julia refocused on her task, but an unsettling knot tightened in her stomach. She knew with a chilling certainty that her tranquil professional life was about to become anything but. For 42 years, Julia had cultivated a life of calm predictability. Her divorce 12 years prior, her grown daughter, Olivia, thriving as a landscape architect in another state, and her steady, fulfilling work in the cardiology department, where she was the undisputed, albeit unofficial, leader. Her colleagues respected her not only for her precise surgical skill, but for her innate humanity. Patients adored her for her quiet compassion and her gift for finding just the right words during their most frightening moments. But by the very next morning, it was abundantly clear that Victor Harding had no intention of treading lightly. "Time for treatment and patient stays in the cardiology department will be reduced by 20%. Harding announced at the morning briefing, his voice echoing in the small conference room. "Patient turnover rates will increase. Overtime hours require my written pre-approval." "That's impossible," Julia countered, her voice resonating with the collective disbelief in the room. "We work with human beings, not an assembly line." Harding glanced down at a document on his polished oak podium. "Dr. Patterson, if I recall correctly, you've been here for quite some time. While I appreciate your tenure, times are changing. We either adapt or this department will face closure." "Adapting is one thing, Victor," Julia said, a steel edge creeping into her voice. "But compromising patient care for the sake of statistics is entirely another. We can't maim people just to meet arbitrary quotas." "Patients shouldn't languish in a hospital for weeks due to your sentimentality." Julia felt a flush of indignant heat rise to her face. Sentimentality? 20 years of faultless work, hundreds of lives saved, families given back their loved ones, and he dared to call that sentimentality? "I will not allow my department to be turned into a factory," she declared, her voice low and dangerous. "This is no longer your department, Dr. Patterson," Harding retorted, his eyes cold and unwavering. The following weeks dissolved into a silent, gruelling war. Harding implemented new stringent protocols. Julia quietly, subtly undermined those she deemed detrimental to her patients' well-being. She stayed late, long after her shift, to sit with particularly vulnerable patients, offering comfort and explanation. She deliberately stretched surgical timelines when a complex case demanded every ounce of her precision and patience, knowing that rushing could mean disaster. Harding issued warnings, formal reprimands, even threats of disciplinary action. But Julia, guided by an unshakable inner compass, continued to do what she believed was right. "Why are you so hard on him, Dr. Patterson?" her scrub nurse Laura asked one evening, as they were the last two left in the changing room. "He's not a monster, he just operates differently." "Differently is when you embrace new, cutting-edge treatments that genuinely help people, Laura," Julia explained, her voice tinged with weariness, but also deep conviction. "When you forget that a patient is a person, a soul, not just a number on a chart, that's something else entirely." "But he's a doctor too, isn't he? He must have taken the Hippocratic Oath once upon a time." "Oaths are easy to swear, Laura," Julia murmured, pulling off her surgical cap. "It's living by them that's the true challenge." The breaking point in their strained relationship arrived one crisp late September evening. Dr. Julia Patterson had just shed her scrubs, ready for the quiet reprieve of her evening, when the blare of the emergency room intercom shattered the hospital's hushed calm. A male patient had just arrived with a severe abdominal knife wound. The on-call surgeon was out on another emergency, leaving Julia as the only senior surgeon available. Her heart immediately tightened. This was her burden now. Once in the operating room, the gravity of the situation hit her like a cold wave. The liver was severely compromised, and internal bleeding was rampant. They needed an assistant, and not just any assistant. They needed someone experienced, someone who could anticipate her every move. "Who can we call?" her scrub nurse Laura asked, her voice tight with urgency. "Dr. Evans is tied up and Dr. Miller's out with the flu." Julia quickly ran through the limited options in her mind. Every second counted. "Dr. Harding is still in the building," Laura hesitantly offered, almost as an afterthought. "He's a surgeon, isn't he?" Julia hesitated for only a heartbeat, the image of Victor Harding's unyielding gaze from their last confrontation flashing in her mind. But the patient's life hung precariously in the balance. "Call him," she barked, her voice clipped, already prepping her instruments. Victor appeared within what felt like mere moments, already changed into a fresh set of surgical scrubs, his face devoid of his usual sternness, replaced by a focused intensity. Without a word, he moved to the assistant's side of the operating table and began to work. Julia was utterly stunned. His hands moved with an almost ethereal certainty, precisely, efficiently. He anticipated her next move, handing her the exact instrument she needed before she even had to ask. It was an unspoken ballet, a seamless collaboration that transcended their personal animosity. The operation stretched on for 5 grueling hours, tense, heart-stopping minutes ticking by, as the patient's life teetered on the brink. But together, they pulled him back. They saved him. "Not a bad job, Patterson," Victor remarked, his voice a low rumble as they finally emerged from the operating room, the stale scent of antiseptic clinging to their scrubs. "You too," Julia responded, a faint, weary smile touching her lips. It was their first genuinely civil exchange in a month and a half, a quiet truce born of shared purpose. "Where did you pick up that technique?" she asked, a genuine curiosity piqued. Victor paused, then replied, "The Maxwell Institute, 7 years in neurosurgery." "Why did you leave?" Julia pressed, surprised by her own boldness. Victor was silent for a moment, his gaze distant. "Tired of big ambitions and mean people," he finally said, his voice flat. Julia looked at him with renewed interest. For the first time since he'd arrived, she saw not cold confidence in his eyes, but a profound weariness, a hint of something deeper beneath his unyielding facade. "Would you like some coffee?" she offered, the words surprising even herself. They found themselves in the small, cluttered doctor's lounge, sipping lukewarm instant coffee from flimsy plastic cups. The hospital hummed around them, but in that small space a different kind of quiet settled, allowing them to speak not as adversaries, but as two human beings. "You think I don't understand medicine?" Victor asked, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "Your methods speak for themselves," Julia replied, unwilling to completely drop her guard. "My methods are about trying to save this department," he countered, a flash of his old intensity returning. "Funding is being slashed, staff are laid off, equipment isn't updated. If we don't show efficiency, they'll shut us down." "And what good is efficiency if we lose our humanity in the process?" Julia challenged, her heart aching for the patients she championed. "Humanity won't keep the hospital's doors open," Victor stated plainly. Julia fell silent, a troubling thought taking root. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps her unwavering principles were a luxury they could no longer afford. "In the city I used to save 10 lives a day," Victor continued, his gaze fixed on his coffee cup. "Streamlined procedures, clear algorithms, no wasted motions. But you know what surprised me most here?" "What?" Julia asked, leaning forward slightly. "The way you talk to your patients, how you hold an elderly woman's hand before surgery, how you explain everything to families, even when the news is difficult. I'd forgotten that's part of healing too." A warmth, gentle and unexpected, spread through Julia's chest. "And what surprised me was how you operate," she confessed, meeting his gaze. "I haven't seen hands like yours in a long time." "So," Victor said, a hint of something akin to hope in his voice, "can we learn from each other?" "We can try," Julia replied, a tentative smile forming. From that day forward, their professional confrontation began to transform into a cautious, then committed collaboration. Victor still demanded efficiency, but now he consciously factored in the human element, seeing beyond the numbers. Julia, in turn, learned to work with a newfound swiftness, without compromising the meticulous quality she was known for. They began to operate together, frequently, an almost telepathic understanding growing between them in the operating room. They felt each other's movements, working as a single, perfectly synchronized entity. "You have a family?" Julia asked him one evening, after an especially demanding surgery had finally concluded. "I did," Victor replied, his voice tinged with a faint sadness. "My wife couldn't endure my work hours. My son lives with her in another country." "Do you miss them?" "Every single day." "And you?" Victor asked. "My daughter's thriving in another state," Julia said, a pang of motherly pride mixing with a familiar ache. "My ex-husband is out there somewhere too." She sighed. "Loneliness, I suppose, is an occupational hazard for surgeons. Or maybe it's a defense mechanism. It's hard to truly open your heart when every day you see how fragile life can be." They talked for hours, not just about work and patients, but about life itself. Julia found herself looking forward to his arrival, a subtle lightness entering her step when he suggested they tackle a complex case together. Victor, too, seemed to soften, becoming gentler with the nursing staff, more attentive to the patients.
"You're having an effect on me,"
he admitted one afternoon, a rare unguarded comment. "Good or bad?" she teased gently.
"I don't know,"
he mused, looking out the window at the setting sun.
"I used to be so certain about everything. Now I find myself doubting."
"Doubt can be a good thing," Julia said, her voice soft but firm. "It keeps us from standing still." Their colleagues began to notice the subtle shift, the unspoken current flowing between them. Laura, Julia's scrub nurse, caught them one afternoon in the doctor's lounge. They stood side by side, poring over x-rays, their shoulders almost imperceptibly brushing. Later, when they were alone, Laura whispered to Julia, her eyes sparkling with insight. "Dr. Patterson, do you realise you're in love?" Julia scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Don't be silly, Laura." Yet deep in her heart, a truth she'd tried to deny resonated with Laura's words. She had fallen, against all her rational judgment, for this complex, contradictory man. She was captivated by his surgeon's hands, so precise and powerful, yet capable of such unexpected gentleness with patients. She loved his surprising capacity for change, for allowing his rigid certainty to soften and bend. Everything shifted irrevocably on a biting winter evening. Julia was on call in the cardiology department when the urgent wail of an ambulance pierced the night, signalling a critical trauma case. A victim of a severe car accident was being rushed into the emergency room. Multiple fractures, severe internal injuries, and a devastating head trauma. Only when Julia approached the gurney, her breath hitched. Lying pale and still on the stretcher, blood matting his temple, was Victor Harding. The world around her seemed to screech to a halt, the fluorescent hospital lights blurring into a harsh halo. Julia, the seasoned surgeon who had witnessed countless tragedies, who faced life-and-death situations with unshakable calm, suddenly found herself simply a woman on the precipice of losing the man she loved. Her mind reeled with a terrifying vulnerability she hadn't known she possessed. "Dr. Patterson!" Laura, the emergency room nurse, called out, her voice cutting through Julia's shock. "What's our plan?" Julia forced herself to breathe, drawing on decades of professional discipline. Now was not the time for a woman's fear. Now she was a doctor, and she was honour-bound to save him. "To the operating room," she commanded, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Immediately!" The next 5 hours melted into the most harrowing ordeal of her life. She fought for the life of the man who had, against all odds, become so deeply precious to her. Her hands, usually so steady, moved with an almost superhuman precision, guided by an unwavering will. Her voice remained calm, issuing clear instructions to the surgical team, but inside, a primal scream of terror echoed through her soul. "Pulse is dropping," the anesthesiologist announced, his voice tight. "Pressure's critical," Laura added, her eyes wide with concern. "Hold on," Julia whispered, her plea directed as much to Victor as it was to her own faltering hope. "Just hold on." The operation was a success. Victor lived, though a long, arduous rehabilitation lay ahead. Julia rarely left his bedside during those critical first days, a quiet vigil that spoke volumes. She stayed until his eyelids fluttered, until his eyes, those once cold, now vulnerable eyes, finally opened. "Julia," he murmured, his voice a faint whisper barely audible. "I'm here," she replied, her own voice thick with emotion, her hand instinctively reaching for his, her fingers entwining with his weaker ones. "I thought I wouldn't see you again," he managed, a shadow of despair in his eyes. "Don't be foolish," she whispered back, a gentle rebuke. "I saved you."
"Why?" he asked, his gaze searching hers.
"Because the department needs you. The patients need you," she said, the words coming easily.
"Only them?"
he pressed, a hint of his old directness returning, even in his weakened state. Julia looked into his eyes, a depth of feeling passing between them that needed no words. In that moment, she knew she could no longer lie, not to him, not to herself. "No," she admitted softly, her heart aching with the truth. "Not only them." A faint, tender smile touched his lips.
"I love you too,"
he whispered, the words of fragile promise in the quiet room. 3 months later, Victor returned to work, still a little unsteady on his feet, but fiercely determined. He insisted on seeing patients, on getting back into the rhythm of hospital life. Julia understood. Work for him wasn't just a profession. It was his very way of living. They became a quiet couple, not flaunting their affection, not hiding it either. Their colleagues who had witnessed their fierce clashes and then their burgeoning respect simply grew accustomed to seeing them together. Patients, sensing the warmth and genuine care emanating from them, found comfort in their presence.
"You know what's the most surprising thing?"
Victor said to Julia one crisp evening as they walked the hushed corridors, making their evening rounds. "What?" she asked, leaning into his side.
"I came here to change this department," he mused, "and I ended up changing myself."
"We both changed," Julia responded, a gentle smile on her face. "And now?"
"Now," he said, drawing her closer, "we keep working, we keep saving lives, and we keep learning how to love. Especially at our age."
Julia tucked her arm more firmly through his. They were good together, in their work and in their lives. 2 hearts beating in unison, 2 souls who had found each other through their shared profession, through pain, and through the profound understanding that life was simply too short to be spent alone. Through the large window of the operating theatre, the setting winter sun cast long shadows. Ahead lay new surgeries, new patients, new challenges. But now they would face them together. "Ready, Dr. Patterson?" Victor asked, pulling on his sterile gloves, his eyes sparkling with a familiar fire. "Ready, Dr. Harding," Julia replied, her gaze meeting his, filled with warmth and a quiet strength. And, together, they walked into the operating room. 2 professionals who had learned not only to heal others' hearts, but to finally open their own.